In December 2012, the United States Department of Justice held a press conference to announce the largest bank fine in American history, $1.9 billion. The bank had admitted to laundering at least $881 million for the Sinaloa cartel, the most powerful drug trafficking organization on earth, led by a man named Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who was at that moment still at large and responsible for flooding North America with heroin, cocaine, and crystal meth. It had also admitted to processing hundreds of millions of dollars in transactions for banks in Iran, Sudan, Libya, Cuba, and Burma countries under strict US sanctions. It had admitted that cartel operatives had walked into its branches carrying specially constructed boxes engineered to fit perfectly through the bank's teller windows, and deposited hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash at once, without ID, without questions. The bank was HSBC, the seventh largest bank in the world, headquartered in London, operating in 75 countries, holding the savings and mortgages and business accounts of tens of millions of ordinary people. The DOJ announced that no criminal charges would be filed, no banker would be indicted, no executive would go to prison. The bank would pay the fine, promise to do better, and continue operating. El Chapo, when he was eventually caught and extradited, received life in prison plus 30 years. His banker got a $2.5 million bonus. This is the story of how a bank built on the opium trade became the world's most prolific financial criminal, and what it tells us about who the law is actually designed to protect. To understand HSBC, you have to start where it started. Not London. Not the glass towers of Canary Wharf, a colonial port city in 1865 where the British Empire had just won its second war fought specifically to force a foreign nation to accept its drug exports. The Opium Wars. That is not a metaphor or a reframing. Britain fought two wars, the first ending in 1842, the second in 1860, to compel the Chinese government to allow British merchants to continue selling opium to the Chinese population, against the explicit laws of the Qing dynasty. The wars ended with unequal treaties, seized territories, and a business model protected by naval gunfire. By the time HSBC's founder, a Scottish shipping superintendent named Thomas Sutherland, opened the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation on March 3rd, 1,865 opium accounted for 70% of what the British Empire exported into China. The bank was created to finance that trade. Its earliest clients included Jardine Matheson, one of the dominant opium trading houses in Asia, which remains a major conglomerate to this day. The bank expanded rapidly. By 1875, it had branches in Japan, India, Vietnam, the Philippines, and San Francisco. In 1888, it established Thailand's very first bank and printed the country's first banknotes. By 1900, it had become the dominant financial institution across British colonial Asia. The phrase Sutherland used to describe his vision for the bank was sound Scottish banking principles. He did not elaborate on which principles exactly he had in mind. For most of the 20th century, HSBC moved through history the way large banks do, quietly, profitably, and without much public scrutiny. It financed the infrastructure of empire. It printed currency. It survived Japanese occupation during the Second World War, when its Hong Kong operations were forcibly shut and its managers interned in prisoner of war camps. It rebuilt. It expanded. In 1991, the holding company HSBC Holdings plc was incorporated in London. A year later, it acquired Midland Bank and became one of Britain's largest domestic lenders, the bank that held ordinary British families' mortgages and savings. The bank that had started financing opium shipments in colonial Hong Kong was now, by the early 2000s, one of the most systemically important financial institutions in the world, too large to fail, too connected to ignore, too global to fully understand. That last part is important, because what HSBC's size created, more than anything else, was a problem of visibility. An institution operating in 75 countries with thousands of branches processing millions of transactions per day has a compliance problem that is not merely administrative, it is architectural. And some people inside the bank understood exactly how to exploit that. In 2002, HSBC made an acquisition that would define the next decade of its history. It bought a Mexican bank called Vital, a mid-sized institution with deep roots in the country's financial system, and according to subsequent investigations, almost no meaningful compliance infrastructure. Internal auditors flagged the problem immediately. Vital's anti-money laundering systems were, in the words of people who reviewed them, essentially non-existent. The expectation was that HSBC management would impose its standards on the new acquisition and fix it. That did not happen. By the mid-2000s, as the Mexican drug war was escalating into one of the bloodiest conflicts in the Western Hemisphere, the Sinaloa cartel had discovered something extraordinarily useful. HSBC Mexico would accept almost anything. The cartel designed boxes, physical, custom-built boxes, engineered to fit through the dimensions of HSBC's teller windows. They would arrive at branches and deposit hundreds of thousands of US dollars at a time. In one documented instance, a Sinaloa associate deposited $933,000 in cash in a single visit. Then there were the Cayman Islands accounts. HSBC's international network meant that Mexican customers could be encouraged to open accounts routed through HSBC's Cayman Islands operations. There was no physical branch there, it was all administered from desks in Mexico City. In a matter of months, the bank opened 50,000 to 60,000 accounts, often without requiring ID or basic paperwork. From the Cayman Islands, the drug dollars could move anywhere on Earth. The U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations later described HSBC as having exposed the U.S. financial system to a wide array of money laundering, drug trafficking, and terrorist financing risks. Its 2012 report ran 339 pages. $881 million in confirmed cartel proceeds, and that, investigators noted, was only what could be traced. Here is the detail that belongs in a novel but is in fact documented history. The chairman of HSBC during the period when the Sinaloa cartel was moving hundreds of millions of dollars through its branches was a man named Stephen Green. Stephen Green was not merely a banker. He was an ordained priest of the Church of England. He had been ordained while stationed in Hong Kong. He had spent decades speaking publicly about business ethics, moral responsibility, and the duty of corporations to society. In 2009, while he was chairman of HSBC, while El Chapo's associates were delivering cash in specially designed boxes to his bank's teller windows, Stephen Green published a book. It was titled Time's Good Value: Reflections on Money, Morality, and an Uncertain World. The book argued that businesses have a duty to society and that ethical and spiritual values must not be left at the boardroom door. In January 2005, HSBC's own head of compliance sent an email to Green directly, flagging serious concerns about the bank's exposure to money laundering. "Stephen," it began, "there are two matters which I should briefly draw to your attention given their seriousness and potential repercussions. There is no public record of what, if anything, Green did in response. In 2010, Stephen Green left HSBC to become a government minister, Minister of State for Trade and Investment in the British coalition government, a position in which he was never subjected to any official inquiry into his tenure at the bank. 2 years later, El Chapo's bankers paid $1.9 billion and went back to work. Green's successor as chief executive, Stuart Gulliver, acknowledged that between 2004 and 2010, HSBC's anti-money laundering controls should have been stronger and more effective. He said the bank had failed to spot and deal with unacceptable behavior. Gulliver was paid more than $2.5 million in bonuses the year the fine was announced. The Sinaloa cartel was not the only client problem the Senate report exposed. HSBC had been processing transactions for banks and entities in Iran, Libya, Sudan, Cuba, and Burma, all countries under strict US sanctions. The bank's method was, by the standards of financial crime, almost elegant. It stripped identifying information from wire transfers before routing them through the American banking system. The transactions moved through US clearinghouses with their origins scrubbed clean. More than 2,300 such payments, totaling approximately $430 million, were processed this way, according to the US Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. There was also Al Rajhi Bank, a Saudi financial institution that a US Senate subcommittee linked to connections with Al-Qaeda and violent extremists in Chechnya. HSBC had been delivering physical US dollar banknotes to Al Rajhi through its banknotes department. In 2005, Bloomberg Markets had published a report alleging that HSBC was allowing money laundering by state sponsors of terrorism. The report alleged that a $100,000 transfer had gone to the Taliban in Afghanistan in April 2000 and had already resulted in a Treasury fine. Green, as chairman, called the allegations a singular and wholly irresponsible attack on the bank's international compliance procedures. The Senate's 339-page report, published 7 years later, suggested the situation was considerably more complex than that. The US Senate committee branded HSBC as having been pervasively polluted for a long time. One compliance officer, the investigation revealed, was responsible for monitoring 50,000 suspicious alerts per year. 50,000! In December 2012, after years of investigation by the DOJ, the IRS, the Senate, and multiple regulatory agencies, the United States government had a decision to make. Prosecutors had prepared a list of up to 175 criminal charges against HSBC. Rank-and-file investigators wanted to indict the bank. Some wanted executives charged personally. Then came the intervention. Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, contacted American authorities. His argument was direct. HSBC was too large, too interconnected, too systemically important to the global financial system to withstand criminal prosecution. If the bank lost its US banking license, which a criminal conviction could trigger, the consequences would ripple through the entire global economy. No hard evidence was offered to support this claim. No modeling was presented. It was an assertion. The DOJ relented. Assistant Attorney General Lanny Breuer explained the logic publicly. Had the US authorities decided to press criminal charges, HSBC would almost certainly have lost its banking license in the US. The future of the institution would have been under threat, and the entire banking system would have been destabilized. The bank paid $1.9 billion at that time, the largest fine in US banking history. At the moment it was announced, $1.9 billion represented approximately 5 weeks of HSBC's profits. El Chapo, the man whose cartel's money HSBC had laundered, received life imprisonment plus 30 years when he was eventually tried and convicted. No HSBC executive was charged. No HSBC banker went to prison. The New York Times editorial board, the day the deal was announced, ran a piece under the headline, "Too Big to Indict." 3 years before the DOJ settlement, a quiet French-Italian computer engineer named Hervé Falciani had already been sitting on information that would eventually shake HSBC to its foundations. Falciani had worked at HSBC's Geneva private banking branch as a systems engineer from 2001 to 2008. His job was database management. What he found in those databases changed his life and became, according to Times Le Monde, the biggest banking leak in history. He copied 600 files over 100 gigabytes of data containing account details for more than 130,000 HSBC Switzerland clients across more than 200 countries. The files showed that HSBC's Geneva branch had been actively helping clients evade taxes, hide assets, and in some cases, launder money. Among those clients, according to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, arms dealers, people connected to blood diamond operations, associates of dictators including Hosni Mubarak, Bashar al-Assad, and Ben Ali, politicians from Britain, Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Kenya, and dozens of other nations. The Swiss arm of the bank had served, in the words of the ICIJ investigation, people connected to arms trafficking, blood diamonds, and bribery. Falciani tried to bring the information to Swiss judicial authorities. He was ignored. He went to Beirut and, according to Swiss prosecutors, attempted to sell the data. He says he was trying to activate an alarm system. Swiss authorities issued an international arrest warrant and sentenced him, in absentia, to 5 years in prison. The data eventually reached the French government, which shared it with tax authorities in the US, Spain, Italy, Greece, Germany, Britain, Ireland, India, Belgium, and Argentina. The result, across those countries, was the recovery of billions of dollars in unpaid taxes. HSBC paid a €300 million settlement in France to avoid going to trial. It paid $53 million in Switzerland to avoid criminal charges there as well. In the UK, where HSBC was headquartered and regulated, there was no official inquiry. Not one. Here is the part of this story that most people don't know. After the 2012 settlement, HSBC was placed under a 5-year deferred prosecution agreement. A court-appointed monitor, a former top New York financial crimes prosecutor, was brought in to oversee the bank's reforms. A team of nearly 300 lawyers and accountants spent years reviewing HSBC's compliance procedures in nearly a dozen countries per year. The conditions of the agreement were specific. The bank was supposed to tie executive bonuses to compliance progress. Salaries were to be reduced if standards slipped. By 2014, HSBC was back to paying enormous executive bonuses, including more than $2.5 million for its chief executive. To comply with an EU cap on banker bonuses, the bank exploited a regulatory loophole, providing senior executives with large allowances that technically fell outside the bonus ceiling. While under probation, and while the monitor's team was conducting their reviews, a money laundering ring moved $4.2 billion through a network of 60 HSBC accounts in Hong Kong. The ring operated for years. It was discovered internally by the bank. The monitor was never told. A former member of the monitoring team, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, HSBC never voluntarily disclosed money laundering. They waited to be asked about it. Of that specific Hong Kong ring, as far as I'm aware, this particular report was never disclosed to the monitor. This appeared to be a bigger money laundering network than any we had identified at the bank. US Senator Elizabeth Warren, upon learning of the continued activity, said, HSBC had nearly a decade to clean up its act, yet it continued to break the law after receiving mere slaps on the wrist for previous violations. In 2017, the DOJ declared HSBC reformed and allowed its probation to lapse. The same year, the UK's Financial Conduct Authority fined HSBC £63.9 million sterling for serious weaknesses in its money laundering processes. Step back and look at what this is actually a story about, because it is easy to frame HSBC's history as a series of failures, compliance failures, management failures, systems failures. The language of corporate accountability, the language of we should have done better, and we have fundamentally changed, and we accept responsibility for past mistakes suggests isolated incidents, things that slip through. What the full picture describes is something different. HSBC was founded to finance opium. It grew inside an empire built on forced trade and military subjugation. It operated for a century and a half across the developing world, in countries where regulatory oversight was minimal and political protection was available to those who knew the right people. When it laundered money for the Sinaloa cartel, it was not a rogue branch acting outside institutional norms. Its management was warned in writing. Its chairman was an ordained priest writing books about business ethics at the same time. When it processed transactions for sanctioned regimes, it didn't accidentally fail to strip identifying information. The stripping of that information was a payment practice systematic, repeated across more than 2,300 transactions. When it helped 130,000 clients hide money in Switzerland, it wasn't a side operation. It was a private banking service with dedicated staff, internal notes, client relationship managers, and institutional infrastructure. And when the full weight of American law enforcement arrived, with 175 criminal charges prepared, it made one phone call to the British Treasury and the charges disappeared. The lesson that teaches is not about HSBC. It's about what "too big to jail" actually means in practice. It means that a certain size of institution exists outside the law not because the law doesn't apply, but because the consequences of applying it have been preemptively defined as catastrophic by the people the law would punish. The man in the cartel who carried the cash-filled box to the teller window is serving decades. The man who designed the window to receive it wrote a book about ethics and joined the government. HSBC today is the 7th largest bank in the world, with $3 trillion in assets, 39 million customers, and operations in 57 countries. It has paid, in total, billions of dollars in fines across multiple jurisdictions. It has agreed to multiple deferred prosecution agreements. It has hired compliance chiefs, built new monitoring systems, appointed external reviewers, and published statements of remorse. In 2023, a Bureau of Investigative Journalism and Guardian investigation found that a $4.2 billion money laundering ring had been operating through its Hong Kong accounts just 2 years after its landmark 2012 settlement, and that the bank appeared never to have disclosed the discovery to its court-appointed monitor. The bank issued a statement. Investigations are ongoing. Somewhere in the history of this institution, there is a straight line. It runs from an opium trading company in colonial Hong Kong in 1865 through the cash-filled boxes at a Mexican teller window in 2007, through a Geneva database containing the names of 130,000 people hiding money from their governments, through a boardroom where an ordained priest wrote about morality while his compliance officer's emails went unanswered, to a press conference in 2012 where the US Attorney General explained, with evident discomfort, why the law does not apply equally to everyone. That line has never been broken. It has only been renegotiated.